So, you've probably heard of John Bunyan, right? The guy who wrote the classic The Pilgrim's Progress? Well, today we're diving into something else he wrote. It's a lot more intense. We're talking about his incredibly detailed and honestly pretty terrifying vision of the end of the world based on his book, The Resurrection of the Dead. Everything Bunyan argues for, his whole case, it all comes down to this one single verse from the book of Acts. For him, this wasn't just some vague idea. It was the bedrock of reality. And he really zeroes in on that key phrase, both of the just and unjust, meaning everyone, saints and sinners alike, is getting out of that grave. And you got to remember the context here. Bunyan wasn't just writing this in a bubble. Back in the 17th century, some pretty radical groups were making waves, and they taught that the only resurrection was a spiritual one, like being born again while you're still alive. Bunyan saw this as a huge, dangerous error that totally gutted the promise of a future physical resurrection. So he wrote this book as a direct, no-holds-barred counterattack. Okay, so if everyone is resurrected, what does that actually look like? Well, in Bunyan's mind, it's not one big happy reunion. Nope, it's two completely different experiences happening at the same time. He draws this incredibly sharp line between what happens to the righteous, who he calls the just, and what happens to the unjust. This right here, this lays out the two paths, and wow, are they different. For the just, it's all about life, glory, and power. But for the unjust, we're talking damnation, dishonor, and weakness. This massive split is the absolute key to understanding Bunyan's entire vision of the end. Let's start with the first group, the just. For Bunyan, their resurrection isn't just about coming back to life. Oh no, it's about a complete and totally glorious transformation. Bunyan asks a really fundamental question. Why even bother raising the physical body? Why not just have a spiritual afterlife? His answer is that our bodies aren't just, disposable shells. He argues they're essential to who we are. They are part of Christ, bought and paid for, and literally temples for the Holy Spirit. And here's the kicker. Because our bodies shared in all the suffering on earth, they must also get to share in the reward of heaven. Now, to explain how this crazy transformation works, Bunyan uses a really simple but powerful metaphor, a seed. Just think about it. You plant this dry, dead-looking little kernel in the dirt. It basically dies and rots away. But then, out of that decay, something incredible springs up, a living plant. It's still the same thing. You plant wheat, you get wheat, but it's been transformed into something way more alive and glorious. So Bunyan breaks down the seed to harvest idea into 4 amazing contrasts. Let's walk through them. First, the body is sown in corruption. It gets old, it decays, it dies. But it's raised in incorruption, perfect and eternal. It's sown in the dishonor of a tomb, but raised in blinding glory. Sown in weakness, raised in unbelievable power. And finally, what was a normal natural body becomes a powerful spiritual body. So what's the end game here? A perfected body. And we're not talking about just a repaired version of your old one. This is a glorious, powerful, spiritual body that can never get sick again, never feel pain, and never, ever die. In Bunyan's own words, it'll be able to move and act with the same freedom and power as an angel. Okay, get ready for a sharp turn, because now we have to look at the other side of Bunyan's vision, the resurrection of the unjust. And let me tell you, this isn't a transformation into glory. It is a dreadful, terrible awakening. Once again, Bunyan asks, why? Why not just leave the wicked to rot in the grave? And his answer is absolutely uncompromising. Justice requires it. Since their bodies were partners in crime with their souls, the whole person has to face the music together. For Bunyan, all that patience God shows people in this life, that's not a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's just the prelude to a final day when that patience finally runs out. And this is where the contrast gets truly horrifying. Where the just rise in glory, the unjust are raised in what Bunyan calls a loathsome and contemptible state of dishonor. Where the just are filled with power, the unjust are completely paralyzed by weakness and absolute despair. And while the just are made perfect and incorruptible, the unjust, they rise up still corrupted by sin, haunted by guilt, and already feeling the horror of an eternal death. To really drive this home, Bunyan leans on this verse from the book of Daniel. The dishonor of the wicked isn't some private affair. No, it's a public spectacle of shame and contempt that is, in his words, everlasting. So both groups are now resurrected, and this leads us straight to the climax of Bunyan's entire vision, the final, dramatic day of judgment for every single human being. Now, here's the twist. The judgment isn't the same for everybody. The just are called up first, but it's not to be condemned. Instead, Bunyan argues their past sins are actually brought out into the open to show just how deep and amazing God's forgiveness really is. After that, their good deeds are recognized and rewarded, which only adds to their eternal joy. Then comes the judgment of the wicked, and Bunyan paints this absolutely terrifying formal scene. A great white throne appears. All the dead, from kings to commoners, are dragged before it, and then the books are opened. This part is fascinating. What are these books? Well, Bunyan lays out a few of them. First, there's a book of natural law, judging people by the basic conscience God gave everyone. Then, a book of remembrance, a perfect and frankly terrifying record of every single thought, word, and deed ever. There's the book of divine law, the commandments from the Bible. And finally, there's the book of life, which has the names of the saved. According to Bunyan, if your name isn't in that last book, well, the other books are used to build the inescapable case against you. After the judgment is over, that's it. There are no appeals. There are only two final, irreversible, and eternal destinies. For the righteous, the verdict is a glorious one. They get to hear the words, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you." Their future is an eternity of pure joy and perfect friendship with God. But for the unjust, the sentence is what the Bible calls the second death. And Bunyan does not hold back. He quotes straight from the Gospels to describe this state of eternal torment, where their worm dieth not and the fire is not quenched. It is a stark, totally uncompromising, and terrifying final image. Look, Bunyan's vision is a powerful, deeply serious warning from a completely different time. It forces you to think about these huge questions of justice, morality, and what happens in the end. And it really leaves us with a challenging thought to chew on. In our world today, what place, if any, is there for an idea like a final universal judgment?